Okay, so with no further delay, there's no music, no introduction. I'm not doing any of that today. First, what I want to do is welcome you back to Nurse Eades Top 10 15 Test Taking Tips. This is going to be your go to guide for nursing students as they're preparing for their first exam. Again, I'm your host, Nurse Eades, and today we're going to be looking at strategies to help you conquer those higher level nursing questions with confidence. So we're going to just explore a little bit about my rule it out technique. And so if you get a chance, grab some pen and paper, come back, listen to it first. Okay, then grab some pen and paper, come back, listen to it again, take some notes. Because I want to get everybody ready. So this is really important. So first, let me explain to you the rule it out technique. It is really more than just a method. It's about a mindset. So it's about approaching questions systematically and logically. And so before we get to these tips that I was talking about, I'm going to break down what this technique is about. So if you have an NCLEX book, you have access to questions. And if you don't, reach out to me on my Instagram page, Nurse Eades, Nursing Made Easy. Reach out to me. I do tutoring there, and I can get you access to questions, give you some resources that might benefit you. You can DM me on there. Okay? So the biggest thing is when you're looking at your questions, understanding what the question is asking you. Identify specifically. A lot of times you will find that there's a lot of information in there that you don't need, but the question directs you to that. And so even while we're talking, I'm going to do something that I don't normally do because I'm improvising here. And I'm just going to grab a book. Okay, so I'm back. We're clear. So I'm gonna do a little bit of a sample for you, so because I want to help you understand what that's about. Once you understand what the question is asking you, you're going to eliminate any obvious wrong answers. Okay, and then so narrow down what those choices are. So you're going to have a question that's going to come before you. Majority of the time, you're going to have four answers unless there are select all that apply, or unless you have a tricky teacher out there. And I'm not saying that she's being tricky, but a lot of the times we throw a couple in there just to kind of evaluate what, your understanding of the material. But for the most part, what I want you to do is narrow down your choices. Look for the obvious wrong answers, mark them out. If you, for one split second, think, oh, I don't know, question mark it. Go into the next answer. Then when you are done, don't look at the questions that you knew were the wrong answer. You're wasting your time reading them over and over again. Because what happens is when you start reading them over and over again, everyone goes through this process where they try to make the wrong answer right. So they go, but what if? But what if? If your brain is telling you, but what if, you need to stop and abandon that thought until you reviewed the ones that you have question marks with. Analyze those remaining options. Look for clues that point to the correct answer. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try that one. I'm just going to see if I can just pull up and find myself a question. In the meantime, we could probably just go on into some top 15 test taking tips because I don't want to waste you guys' time. Okay, so let's go into that, and then you know what? We'll do the questions at the end. Okay, so let's look at the 15 tips that we're going to be talking about. So one, I want to make sure that when you take your first test, that you're making sure that you're reading it carefully. Don't rush. Understand what the question is asking you fully. And that goes back to a little bit of that rule out technique, understanding the question. Then if you can highlight key terms, if you're taking a paper test, this is easy to do. But if not, you just write those down on a piece of paper if you're allowed to have one, or just make a mental note because this helps you focus on what's really important. And then you're going to use the rule out technique and apply it consistently as you're reading those answers. And trust your instinct. Your initial feeling is usually often right. Most students make mistakes such as not verifying their answer or verifying that the answer they picked was the actual one they chose. And then practice practice, practice. Make sure that you familiarize yourself with the different question formats that are out there, because NCSBN has really updated their questions a good bit. So what I want to do is I want to take a standard question. And so here's an example. It says a nurse is caring for a group of clients on a medical surgical unit. For which of the following client care needs should the nurse initiate a referral for a social worker? And it asks that we select all that apply. So here's where it gets a little tricky, okay, because you're going to have more than 4 answers. So you've read over your material, that you're reading assignments that you have in class. You're being asked this question, and so you're thinking to yourself, okay, what do I need to pay attention to? I'm the nurse. I want a med surg unit. Okay, I'm thinking about client care needs. I'm going to initiate that requires a referral for a social worker. Okay, so I'm referring them to someone else. Why would I do that? So answer A client who has terminal cancer requests hospice care in the home. Well, would I, as a nurse, refer a patient to a social worker, right, to initiate a referral? I'm going to go with yes. So I'm going to put my circle around that because I know that that's a viable answer. I'm reading the next one. A client asks about community resources available for older adults. Would I get a social worker involved to help them with them resources? Yes, because that's part of their assignment. C says, a client states, I would like to have my child baptized before surgery. Would I need to get a social worker? I don't think that one. I'm going to put an X next to that one because I don't think that requires a social worker. Okay. D says a client requests an electric wheelchair for use after discharge. Would I, as a nurse, initiate a referral for a social worker so that they can help my patient get a wheelchair? Yes, that is something I would do. And E says a client states, I do not understand how to use a nebulizer. Would I ask the social worker to teach the patient how to use a nebulizer, or would that be something I do? I think that would be something more that I would do. So I'm going with A. I am going with B. I said no on C. I'm marking that out. C. I said yes on D. And with E, I'm like, yeah, no. So I realized A, B, and D. All of these relate back to my question that says client care needs. In A, B, and D, was there a client need? Yes. They were requesting hospice care. In C, they needed community resources. In D, they needed an electric wheelchair. And was all these 3 something that a social worker would do? Yes, they are. And so I'm going to settle down with my answer being A, B, and D. Okay, so let me go and look and see what the answers are. Because listen, I'm doing this with you guys. So the A is correct. Initiate referral for a social worker to provide information and assistance in coordinating hospice care for a client. B is also correct. To provide information and assistance in coordinating care. And C is not correct. That would be more of a spiritual support staff, to help their child get baptized before surgery. D is a correct answer. So we were correct with A, B, and D. And then E says providing client teaching for concerns regarding use of a nebulizer. Well, that's either my job or the respiratory therapist job. So when it comes to teaching. So with that being said, you see how we were able to like rule out, stick with the ones we know, and by asking questions, is this something that I would do? How about I randomly go to another question because I want something that's a little bit more creative. Okay, so here we go. It says the nurse is caring for a client who fell at a nursing home. Well, that first sentence, I have a client that fell, they're fall risk. That's important to me. That's a priority. The client is oriented to person, place, and time. So they alert and oriented times three, person, place, and time, and they can follow directions. Okay. Which of the following actions should the nurse take to decrease the risk of another fall? Select all apply. So when I look at them, I'm not only going to look at select all that apply, but I'm thinking true or false. Is this something as a nurse I would do to prevent the fall of a patient, another fall? And they're alert and oriented, and they can follow directions. So let's read A. Place a belt restraint on the client when they are sitting on the bedside commode. Would that's false. Would I put a belt restraint on the client while they're sitting on the commode? No, I would not do that. So that's false. So I'm not going to choose that as an answer. B says keep the bed in its lowest position with all side rails up. Now, is that something that I would do? Keep the bed in its lowest position. I would keep the bed in its lowest position, but notice at the end it says with all side rails up. That I don't think you can do that. I think that's a legal issue. And so because the last part of that is false, then the whole part of that whole sentence is false. So I'm not going to go with B. C says make sure that the client's call light is within reach. Okay, I could see myself doing that as a nurse. My patient is alert, they're oriented, they can follow instructions, so I can tell them, here's your call bell. If you have to get up for assistance, please use this call light. If you need anything, when you need, if you need to get up, when you're going to get up. So yeah, that would be something that I could do to one, help with their safety. D says provide the client with non-skid footwear. Well, do you want your patient to have non-skid footwear? I'm going to say true. Yes, that was something I would do. So I'm going to go with that. So far, A is false. Placing a belt restraint on the client when they are sitting on the bedside commode. B, I said is false. To keep the bed in its lowest position with all side rails up, because the all side rails, that's what makes it false. C, I said true, to make sure that the client call light is within reach. I do believe that. D, provide them, the client, with non-skid footwear. I would do that as a nurse to prevent a fall. And E, complete a fall risk assessment. Well, do you need to know how bad of a fall risk your patient is? That is true, and so I would select that. Now, how can I verify and make sure that my answers are correct? Well, when I go back to my question, it says my patient fell at a nursing home. They're already at risk. They're alert and oriented. That's what I need to get out of that information in the second sentence. And which of the following actions should the nurse take to decrease the risk? I want to decrease the risk of a fall. Are they less likely to fall if I give them a call light that's in reach of them? Yes. Would I reduce the risk of a fall if I put proper footwear on them, non-skid? Yes. And can I decrease the risk by doing a fall assessment to determine how bad of a risk, or if there are other precautions I need to take? I'm going to say yes. So C, D, and E, I've marked them all true. Let's go see what the answer is. Okay. It says the correct answers are C, D, and E. You want to make sure the call light is within reach because it enables the client to contact the nursing staff to ask for assistance and prevents the client from falling out of bed or reaching for the call light. Non-skid footwear keeps the client from slipping, and a fall risk assessment serves as the basis for the plan of care that that can then individualize for the client. How bad is the fall risk? It says for the other options, A, by restraining the client, there's a liability risk for false imprisonment. Yes. And full side rails for this client puts the client at risk for a fall because they might attempt to climb over the rails to get out of bed. So you see how that works when you work to do practice questions and you break them down like that, making sure that you're reading them carefully by not rushing through. And notice that I had to read each word to make sure that I understood what it was asking me. If you're one of those people that run through, which I started off, and that was how my semester began, I realized when I went back to look at some things that that I was skipping over words and it was changing the whole meaning of it. So one, making sure that you're reading carefully, make note of what is a priority out of all those things that were there. Use the rule out technique. When you read an answer, if you know it's wrong, put an X over it. If you believe it's right, you put a circle over it. And if you're question marking it, if you hesitate for one instant, you put a question mark. And then you compare the ones that you circled, or you compare only the question marks to help determine your answer. Majority of the time, if you have one that you circled, you kind of go with it, but you still want to make sure that you looked at all the priority terms and words to make sure you're choosing the best answer. Most students can get it down to 2. So you want to make sure that you're using that to evaluate and taking your time. And so we put that into action a little bit with that sample question. So the next thing that I want to do is just briefly go over some test taking tips that I think are going to be important. So we talked about understanding the question. Carefully read each question to fully understand what is being asked. Pay attention to key words or phrases that may guide your answer. That's number 1. Number 2, the next step, eliminate wrong answers. Use my rule out technique to systematically eliminate incorrect options, narrowing down your choices. If part of the answer is right and part of the answer is wrong, the whole answer is wrong. And usually the correct part of the answer, they know that you only read the first few words, so the first few words are going to be correct. But if you don't read the whole sentence to realize that the end of the sentence is incorrect, then you're going to choose it. So don't get in the habit of doing that. Prioritize patient safety. Look for answers that prioritize patient safety and adhere to what you've learned about the protocol for caring for individuals. Now, I want to say another thing about priority. Even though I said prioritize patient safety, there is a higher priority that says death or dying. If it's asking for priority, you're going to look first to determine, is there something that I can do to prevent death or dying of either the patient or their tissue or skin, or if there's poor perfusion that can cause dying of tissues? I want to do that first, and then I'm concerned about their safety. What good is anything that you're going to do for your patient if you don't keep them alive? Next, time management. Allocate your time wisely to ensure that you address all questions. Don't linger too long on a single question. So if you get into the practice of doing it, you get used to reading the question, pulling out what's a priority for you, narrowing down your answers down to the 2 very quickly, and then using your priority cues to determine which one of these answers more reflects what I'm being asked to look for. Use clinical judgment. If you don't know what that is, hit back on one of those podcasts that I did where I talk about clinical judgment. But clinical judgment is where you apply what you've learned in your clinical training to answer scenario-based questions realistically. It is about the doing of the information, your knowledge, taking that knowledge that you have and actually putting it into practice. Highlight key terms. If allowed, underline or highlight terms in your questions that will help you guide your answers. If not, write them down on a piece of paper. Don't change your answer hastily. Stick with your initial choice unless you have a solid reason to change your answer. And how you can make sure that you have a solid reason or is by narrowing down to 2. and using those priority cues to stick with your answer. I have enough. It's asking for an intervention. It's asking for an assessment. It's asking for a plan of care. It's asking for an outcome, and I know what that outcome is supposed to be. And then go back to that example that we used. Practice with in-style questions. And like I said, if you need help, I do tutor on the side. I have a program that's all about questions, and it gets you through whatever semester that you're in, whether it be as a new student or going in, or you sit with me for a couple of hours and I just go through questions with you. It's your option. Next, number 10, review all options. Even if you think you found the correct answer, review all options to ensure you're not missing something, that you haven't missed a word to change the answer. Utilize test-taking strategies that include looking for absolute words, which can often indicate that it's an incorrect choice, because how often is anything absolute? Think like a nurse. And for my LPNs, I apologize. In no way, shape, or form am I offending anyone when I say think like a nurse. I do it. I have a framework for my LPNs. I love them dearly. And you are licensed practical nurse. You guys are awesome. I've worked with you guys in teams, and I would not have been able to do my job without you. But the minute you make the choice that you're going to get into a nursing program to become a registered nurse, all questions when it pertains to nurse is not in reference to the same nurse from your PN exam. It's the nurse from the RN exam. So when I say think, I want you to think like a registered nurse, an RN. Approach the questions from the perspective of a nurse. Prioritize care and empathy. If you are a medical assistant, you have never been in a medical field, then you take the knowledge that you have received in classroom, because that's making you think like a registered nurse. You're going to prioritize that care, making sure that you're using empathy, which is about reflecting that individual's feelings. It's about their feelings and not our own. And for the LPN, it is approach each question as to would you expect your nurse that you work with to do that? Or this new role that I'm getting ready to take on, is this what they're asking me to do? It's unlike what I was doing before. 13, review mistakes from previous exams. Understand where you went wrong in past exams and avoid repeating the same mistakes. That means you have to sit down with your instructor and do a review. I don't care if you got a 98. You want to know them 2 points. Don't leave points on the table. That's where most students do that, because they don't go back to see why they got it wrong. Was it a misunderstanding so they could correct that? Simulate real exam conditions. Practice under conditions that mimic the real exam to build confidence and adaptability, and then seek support if it's needed. Don't hesitate to ask for help from instructors, mentors, or study groups if you're struggling with certain concepts or questions. And if all else fails, you can't find anyone, RNE's Nursing Made Easy on Instagram. You can find me. I will make the time to be available for you. Well, there you have it, future nurses. It's the rule out technique and the top 15 tips to guide you through your nursing exam. With these strategies, you're not just answering questions, you're learning, you're growing, and you're paving your own path to become an exceptional nurse. If you found this episode helpful, please make sure that you subscribe, like, or share with other students. Your feedback fuels this show. So please don't hesitate to leave a comment or review, and make sure that you follow me on social media using my hashtags, hashtag Nurse Eades. You can also do hashtag Nurse Eades, Nursing Made Easy. Find me on any platform there. And until the next time, keep studying, stay dedicated, and remember, with the right techniques, you got this exam in the bag.